Imagine yourself at the edge of the sea. The world is quiet except for the rhythmic breaking of waves against rock and the soft whistle of wind through iron railings. Far below, water churns white against dark stone. Above, the vast dome of sky fades from deep blue to soft gray, and somewhere in the distance, a bell buoy tolls its patient note. Out here, at the farthest reach of land, stands a lighthouse tall, weathered, and solitary. Its walls gleam faintly with the memory of storms. Inside, a steady flame burns behind prisms of cut glass, turning in slow, graceful circles. This light has guided sailors for generations, its pulse marking the boundary between danger and home. Tonight we step quietly into that life, the world of the 19th-century lighthouse keeper. A life of routine and solitude, of devotion to a light that must never go out. We'll explore the rhythm of their days, the maintenance of lamps and lenses, the keeping of weather logs, the long hours of listening to the wind. Then we'll drift through history to the Eddystone Lighthouse and the men who built it against impossible odds. We'll descend beneath forgotten seas to uncover the remains of lost towers. And finally, we'll glance toward the contrast between these isolated sentinels and the bustling ports they guarded from afar. So settle in, let the steady sound of waves fill your mind, and imagine the quiet turning of light through mist, a slow and faithful motion that has watched over the sea for centuries. The keeper's life began before dawn. The sea was often the first sound, a constant presence, even through stone walls. In the gray stillness, he would rise, strike a match, and light a small lamp before dressing. The air inside the tower carried a cool, briny dampness and the faint metallic scent of oil and brass. Each day followed a careful rhythm. The first task was to check the light, even after it had been extinguished at sunrise. The keeper would climb the spiral stairs to inspect the lamp and lens. The steps echoed softly underfoot, spiraling upward through the narrow shaft. At the top in the lantern room, the great lens waited, a gleaming assembly of curved glass panels and polished metal. The keeper would clean it slowly, using soft cloths and a mixture of alcohol and chalk to remove soot and salt. Every surface had to be spotless. Even a thin film of residue could dull the beam that reached miles out to sea. Next came the trimming of the wick. For electric lights, the flame came from oil. First whale oil, later colza or paraffin. The wick burned brightly, but needed constant care. Too short and the flame sputtered. Too long and it smoked. The keeper learned through long practice the precise moment to trim the exact curve of the scissors edge. After the light was tended, there were endless smaller tasks. Brass fittings had to be polished until they gleamed. Windows needed washing, hinges needed oiling. And the clockwork mechanism that turned the lens, a complex series of gears and counterweights, required regular winding. Every few hours, the keeper descended the stairs, turned a crank, and listened to the reassuring click of machinery resetting itself for another steady rotation. There were records to keep as well, weather logs, barometer readings, and details of passing ships. In the keeper's journal, the handwriting was neat and even, a reflection of discipline shaped by solitude. Wind from the southwest, one might write, sea heavy, visibility poor, light steady, each line simple, factual, and quietly human. Meals were taken in the keeper's quarters, a small room with narrow windows, a stove, and a wooden table worn smooth by years of use. Food was plain but filling, bread, salted meat, dried peas, perhaps a bit of butter or cheese. Supplies arrived by boat, weather permitting. Sometimes days passed before any sign of another person. In storms, the isolation became complete, the horizon vanishing into mist, the roar of waves surrounding the tower on all sides. Yet there was comfort in the repetition. Each evening before dusk, the keeper prepared the light once more. He would climb the stairs as the air grew dim, light the wick with practiced care, and watch as the flame brightened into a steady glow. The great glass lenses caught the light and threw it outward, a single beam sweeping slowly across the water. Standing there, he might rest one hand on the brass railing and gaze out into the dark. The beam moved like a heartbeat, slow, constant, reassuring. Sometimes, if the weather was clear, the faint glimmer of another lighthouse could be seen on the far horizon, its pulse answering his own. Between them stretched miles of sea, and between those miles, safety. When storms came, the tower trembled. Waves crashed against its base, sending vibrations up through the stone. Wind howled through gaps in the lantern panes. But the keeper remained at his post, listening to the sound of chains, gears, and wind, all of it part of the same steady rhythm. He would note each gust in his log, check the light again, and perhaps pour a cup of tea before settling near the window to watch the storm. For some, the isolation was a burden. For others, it was a kind of peace, a slow surrender to the endless motion of sea and time. The keeper's world was small, yet complete. The turning of the lamp, the keeping of records, the care of the tower. His task was simple, but absolute, to keep the light burning, no matter the hour or the weather. As dawn returned, the light was extinguished. Smoke curled faintly from the lamp, the sea quieted, and the horizon turned gold once more. The keeper would write one last note in the log, light out. All well. Then for a few hours, he could rest until evening came again, and the watch began anew. Before there were keepers, there had to be towers. And few stories of lighthouse building are as remarkable as that of the Eddystone Lighthouse, a structure born from determination, ingenuity, and the relentless force of the sea. The Eddystone rocks lie off the coast of Devon, treacherously hidden beneath the water during high tide. For centuries, they were a sailor's nightmare, a jagged reef that caught countless ships unawares. In calm weather, the rocks were barely visible. In storms, they were invisible entirely. It was said that even in daylight, their presence could not be trusted. Mariners feared them more than the darkness itself. The first attempt to light these rocks came at the turn of the 18th century. A man named Henry Winstanley, part inventor and part dreamer, undertook the impossible. He imagined a lighthouse rising directly from the reef, a beacon to guide ships safely to Plymouth Harbor. Against advice, he built it himself, designing every piece. His first structure was intricate, almost whimsical, with galleries, decorations, and metal supports. When it was completed in 1698, sailors cheered its light from the sea, but the sea has its own will. One winter night in 1703, during a violent storm, Winstanley himself was inside the lighthouse when the entire structure was swept away. Neither he nor the original tower was ever seen again. Years later, another builder, John Rudyard, tried again. His design was simpler, stronger, and made of wood bound with iron. For nearly 50 years, it stood against the elements. But in 1755, tragedy struck once more. The lantern caught fire. The flames spread rapidly, consuming the wooden frame. The keeper on duty tried to douse it, but the oil-fed blaze was uncontrollable. By dawn, only embers remained. It was the third builder, John Smeaton, who would finally change the course of lighthouse design forever. In 1756, he arrived at the site with a bold new plan. Instead of timber, he would use stone, interlocking granite blocks, carved to fit one another like pieces of a puzzle. He studied the shape of oak trees and realized that strength lay in the curve, not the straight line. Its lighthouse would taper like a trunk, wide at the base and slender at the top, flexible enough to bend, but strong enough to endure. Each stone was numbered and fitted before being set into the reef. Smeaton and his men labored for years, waiting for low tides and calm days. The work was perilous. The sea could rise suddenly, swallowing tools, stones, and scaffolding alike. But in 1759, the new Eddystone Lighthouse was completed. Its light shone for over a century, enduring countless storms and saving innumerable lives. Smeaton's design became the model for lighthouses across the world. Even after his tower was replaced by a newer one in the late 19th century, the upper section was preserved and reassembled on land near Plymouth. It still stands today, a monument to human patience and persistence. When a keeper in the 19th century tended his lamp, he was continuing the legacy that men like Smeaton had begun, a devotion to light, to structure, and to safety. The stones beneath his feet were shaped by hands that believed the sea could be reasoned with, even tamed. And though the ocean never truly yields, it learned to live with those towers of granite and flame. Not every lighthouse survived its purpose. Some were claimed entirely by the water they guarded against. Beneath the calm of modern coasts, there lie the remains of forgotten towers, fragments of stone, iron and glass resting quietly on the seafloor. Archaeologists have found traces of these lost structures, their locations whispered in old maps and maritime records. Some lie off the coasts of Cornwall and Brittany, where storms sweep through each winter with ancient ferocity. Others are found in the Baltic, or near the outer islands of Scotland, where the horizon often vanishes in mist, and the sound of waves is all that breaks the silence. These underwater ruins tell a story of endurance and loss. Divers report columns of granite still standing upright, their surfaces smoothed by centuries of tide. Others are reduced to scattered rubble, overgrown with seaweed and coral. A fragment of a lantern pane, a rusted bolt, a section of stair, each piece hints at the life once lived above it. In some places, local legends still recall these lost lighthouses. Fishermen speak of strange lights flickering below the waves, or of bell sounds carried faintly through fog. Of course, these are stories, reflections of imagination more than reality, but they reveal how deeply these structures were woven into coastal life. There is one account from the early 1800s of a keeper's journal found washed ashore after a storm. Its last entry, written in a steady hand, read simply, "The wind grows heavy. The light still burns, nothing more." The lighthouse it belonged to was never seen again. In truth, the sea has always been both a destroyer and a preserver. It erases human footprints, but it also guards what it takes, keeping it in silence. The ruins of old lighthouses are neither triumph nor failure. They are the natural end of endurance. For centuries, they stood as boundaries between the known and the unknown. When they finally fell, they simply crossed back into that vast, unmeasured world they were built to illuminate. And yet, their memory endures. Modern lighthouses, taller, automated, steel-bound, still rise in the same places. The light continues its slow rotation, and ships still mark their position by its steady pulse. The difference is only that now, the keeper's hand is gone, replaced by quiet machinery. But deep below, the stones remain silent witnesses to a time when light itself was a labor of devotion. The life of a lighthouse keeper stood in quiet contrast to the bustle of the world below. While the tower stood alone in mist and wind, the harbor beneath it thrummed with sound and life. In towns like Plymouth, Whitby, and Aberdeen, the docks were alive from morning till dusk, sails unfurling, ropes creaking, hammers striking wood. Merchants shouted orders, fishermen mended nets, and the scent of tar and salt filled the air. Taverns glowed with warmth, laughter spilling into the streets. Even at night, lamps burned in windows, ships rocked gently in their moorings, and the sea glittered with reflected light. Up in the lighthouse, by contrast, there was only stillness. The keeper might hear the echo of a foghorn far below, or see the twinkle of distant windows, but he remained apart. Letters arrived infrequently, carried by supply boats when weather allowed. News from the mainland came weeks late. For many, that solitude became a quiet companion, a life reduced to essentials. Defined by routine and the constant company of the sea, and yet there was connection between these two worlds. The harbor depended on the lighthouse, and the lighthouse existed only for the harbor. Every gleam of the lantern meant safety for those below. A father returning home, a ship reaching port, a cargo arriving intact. The keeper's isolation was not loneliness, but service, an unseen presence, ensuring that others could live and work without fear. In time, the role of the keeper faded. Electric light replaced flame. Radio replaced logbooks. By the mid-20th century, most lighthouses were automated. The last keepers watched their towers go silent, their rooms emptied, the machinery continuing its steady rotation without them. Yet, their story remains a testament to those who lived between sea and sky, whose task was simple, but whose devotion was absolute. If you listen carefully, you might still hear it, the slow turning of light through darkness, the faint hum of wind around the lantern glass. Though most lighthouses today are unmanned, the spirit of the keepers lingers in their rhythm. Light still turns, just as it always has. Imagine yourself standing at the base of a lighthouse now. Air is cool, filled with salt, and the soft hiss of the tide. Above you, the beam makes its silent circle, sweeping across the night. Each turn marks a second, a minute, an hour, time measured not by clocks, but by light. Those who tended these towers lived by that rhythm. They were part of the machinery, part of the landscape, part of the endless conversation between land and sea. Their work was patient, unending, and often unseen. But it was steady, and it was faithful. a quiet human flame burning against the immensity of nature. So as you rest, think of that beam continuing its path across the water. It moves slowly, calmly, endlessly, as it did a century ago. And like the keepers who once stood watch, you can let your thoughts drift with the waves until the light itself fades gently into sleep.